Welcome to the Check-In, a podcast by the Telos Group on the Telos channel. This is our show, The Check-In, a semi-regular conversation where we deep dive into the headlines from Israel-Palestine and across the world, where we wade into the complexity of seemingly intractable conflict to discover the power of peacemaking to heal us, our community, and our world. This is your host, David Kadabaugh, checking in from Washington, D.C. Today, we are actually just a small group, a one-on-one. I'm here with Greg Khalil. Greg, where are you checking in from?
I'm at home in New York City.
I don't think we've ever done a podcast just us two. This is kind of fun. I'm actually really grateful to have your time, Greg, and for us to just have a smaller conversation because of the particular question that we want to explore today. You have personal experience in, and I think it'll help us navigate some complex dynamics really well. But we are, folks, now to provide you with an update, 106 days into the crisis in Gaza and Israel. Since October 7th, more than 24,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed, with somewhere above 80% of the population in Gaza displaced. Right now, more than tens of thousands of housing units have been destroyed across the region, and the vast majority of Gazans are now without adequate food, water, or medicine and are at risk of starvation and severe disease. Meanwhile, airstrikes and the ground invasion continue, and more than 100 Israelis and other nationals remain captives in Gaza. At the same time, the region is on the brink of even greater escalation as Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon have traded strikes, and the U.S. has started to bomb Houthi locations in Yemen. This is an important moment for our world, folks, and it is our job as peacemakers to lean in, especially after events last week in which South Africa brought before the International Court of Justice a momentous case accusing Israel of contravening or breaching its commitments to the Genocide Convention against the people of Gaza. We're here to talk about that case. It's a pretty big deal on the international scene. It wasn't covered very closely in the US media, and we feel like a peacemaking perspective on what is going on with that case, what it means for our world, what it can mean for the people of Gaza, Israel, and the region is really important to talk about. So I brought Greg in. He actually has personal experience adjudicating a case before the International Court of Justice, and we're going to talk through this. For those of us who aren't aware of these international institutions, what is the International Court of Justice and how does it work?
Sure. The International Court of Justice is the highest judicial body of the United Nations. Sometimes it's called the World Court, and it can adjudicate a number of issues connected to member states of the United Nations or to members that have signed treaties that refer to the ICJ in case of dispute. So what that means very, very basically is like it only deals with states. Individuals don't go in front of the ICJ, and it can only hear cases among member states of the United Nations or around specific issues or around disputes and conventions that people have signed on to. And in this case, both South Africa and Israel signed on to the convention for the prohibition of genocide.
So tell us, what is that convention? What does it require of states to sign on?
Well, under international law, it's a weird thing. International law isn't like sort of, when you think of law here in the United States, there's a lot of philosophical debate about what it is because, fundamental sort of subject of international law is a state. And there has been efforts to expand the idea of who is, governed and who is responsible to individuals as well. We can talk about that later. That's happening now as certain cases are being referred to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which deals with people, not states. But basically, when you're looking at a convention like the Convention on the Prohibition of Genocide, what it means is that sometimes states will sign on and they'll consent. They'll consent to the convention. So the basic principle of international law actually is consent, which is kind of weird. It's, that you wouldn't think about that in a domestic context here. Israel was one of the first signatories of the Genocide Convention back in 1950, I believe. And part of the reason for that is that the very concept of genocide, the terminology, the articulation of the elements of the crime of genocide, and what differentiates it from other war crimes. All of that came in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And in fact, a Jewish lawyer was instrumental in articulating the crime of genocide. And so what you're seeing now is both South Africa and Israel are signatories to this convention, which means they have consented by virtue of adopting and ratifying the convention to the ICJ's jurisdiction in case of dispute. And so South Africa, as a fellow signatory, brought this case against Israel. And there will be other jurisdictional elements and there were jurisdictional elements required, meaning like whether the court can hear it. But as a fellow signatory to the convention, it's seeking provisional relief, provisional measures, basically like an injunction. So it's asking the court to hear the case. It thinks there's plausible evidence that Israel may be committing genocide in Gaza right now. And so it's asking the court to prevent Israel from continuing its campaign so it can look into those claims. So it's actually didn't litigate any of that. Like now is kind of this preliminary hearing, but it's a big deal if the court comes back and rules in South Africa's favor.
So there's so much there, Greg, I want to explore, and especially for those of us who, aren't attorneys, aren't legal experts, some of the terms you're using. I want us to kind of explore what this process looks like. There's a hearing, there's these injunctions, there's an investigation. Walk us through how this all works now that there's a case that has been presented.
Right. So very simply, and this is like the cartoonish version, South Africa made this charge, accused Israel of potentially committing crimes of genocide. So the court and its judges heard arguments from South Africa and Israel and their legal teams. Nations around the world sort of joined in support of South Africa's case, but they heard these arguments. And now what they're going to rule on any day now is whether or not there is a justiciable claim, like whether or not there's enough evidence presented to meet the various elements of the crime of genocide. So is there genocidal intent? That's a really big thing. That's the differentiator, one of the differentiators of the crime of genocide from other war crimes, that there is this specific intent to harm a group and to commit crimes against individuals based on their membership of their group. If they're Jewish, if they're Palestinian, if they're American, trying to wipe out in whole or in part this group. So that's a big claim. So all they're deciding right now, they're looking at is like, are we going to hear this case? And does it meet the elements of the crime? And are we, the court, given our limitations on what cases we can hear and should hear, can we take this case? Should we take this case on? So we'll hear that determination sometime, any day, I would predict pretty soon. And, early February at the latest. And then if that happens, then what will happen is there will be an actual case, and that will be looking at, they may issue provisional measures as sort of this temporary relief. They may not. They may still decide to hear the case. So if they issue provisional measures, if they honor what South Africa's request is, they may call Israel to halt its actions because there's that's the standard, plausible evidence that Israel may be committing genocide right now. It doesn't have the mechanisms enforce that. So like it can make that call, but doesn't mean that Israel will stop. And in fact, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated several times that, whatever happens at the ICJ, Israel's going to keep doing what it's doing. And, in his words, going after Hamas, right? So after this, then, if it's dismissed, there's a whole lot of, activism that may happen as a result of that. As I think most observers think there's a pretty good chance that the court will decide to hear the case, then an actual case will be presented. And that will take many years in all likelihood for that process to unfold.
So let's investigate exactly what South Africa's claims are here. It's accusing Israel of breaching its commitment to the Genocide Convention. What does that mean? What's the evidence that they're bringing to the table in their accusation? And then, how is Israel responding? How are the attorneys that the Israeli government have sent defending their actions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. I encourage everyone to read South Africa's initial complaint to the ICJ. So South Africa, but in short, I'm going to sum this up very quickly so we can get to the points of the significance of this case, because this could not be more significant at this current moment in the world and why this is happening. So very briefly, South Africa has made a case that Israeli government officials, military spokesmen have demonstrated genocidal intent in word and deed over and over. They've cited Prime Minister Netanyahu himself exhorting Israeli soldiers going to battle to Gaza to remember Amalek, this biblical story from Samuel, which says to wipe out every man, woman, livestock, suckling baby, infant, which is a biblical justification for genocide and defining Palestinians as Amalek. They're citing President Isaac Herzog, saying there are no civilians or innocents in Gaza. They're citing all of these claims and actions on the ground, the massive level of destruction and death, the documented indiscriminate bombing, the impact of all of these things as evidence of potential genocide, the beginning of a genocide, all of these things. Israel is defending itself, in two ways. One is the procedural way to say, wait a second, you guys don't have the authority to hear this case because South Africa doesn't have the authority to bring this case. There's not a real dispute between South Africa and Israel here. The dispute here is between Israel and Hamas and, maybe some other players. So, but the main charges that they're saying is, wait a second, this is not genocide. We're exercising legitimate rights to self-defense, and we're targeting Hamas. We're not targeting the Palestinian people. We're taking care to protect civilians from harm. And in fact, South Africa is aiding and abetting a genocidal act by Hamas because Hamas has declared to destroy Israel and to kill Jewish people. So Israel's defense is basically, to sum it up, you don't have the right to hear the case. And even if you did, we're not committing genocide. It's South Africa that's aiding and abetting genocide.
And I think your point also earlier about even if the court does rule against Israel, it's not going to stop them, essentially, is how they've chosen to respond to this, is an important one. And it brings us to this question of, why does this matter? What difference is it going to make for the folks on the ground? You mentioned this possibility of an injunction, a preliminary ruling to halt the violence. But what difference will it make? Does, if there's no ability to enforce these rulings, what's the significance of this case?
The court itself doesn't have the ability to compel enforcement. There isn't a sheriff in international law. And part of the reasons why the case came to the court, remember the United Nations highest court, is because the international bodies set up to protect the peace have been failing. They've been failing miserably. The Security Council hasn't had anything significant to say, much less do, on this crisis 106 days in. That's really significant because I think there are very few observers out there, whether you're for what Israel's doing, against it, for whatever side you stand on for whatever reason. There are very few people out there who don't see the capacity for this to become a truly regional and global war that is reshaping all of our lives that were at the very beginning. So this is precisely the kind of issue that the international community needs to be seized with, right? And the Security Council hasn't been able to do anything. They failed. Part of the reason why they failed, which is interesting, is because of the U.S. veto at the Security Council and U.S. politicking. The U.S., despite President Biden's claims of empathy for Palestinian civilians, or Secretary Blinken's claims, has bypassed Congress to continue to provide additional munitions to Israel, in addition to the $14.3 billion aid package, most of which is for additional weapons to Israel. And that's in addition to the nearly $4 billion in annual aid that we currently provide, which was approved for a decade under President Obama, by the way. So what you're seeing right now is you're seeing an attempt by the world, because many dozens of countries have joined this case, to restrict not just Israel, but also the United States. And so that's really significant right here. And so while the court can't compel enforcement, what we're seeing is we're going to be seeing all sorts of creative ways to enforce international law, not from President Biden, Mr. Let's protect the rules-based international order, let's center human rights in foreign policy, which now we all see, how serious he was about that. But actually from the global south, and from a place like South Africa taking the lead, which of course South Africa is still emerging and trying to rebuild itself after hundreds of years of colonialism, decades of apartheid, and it's now trying to take the lead for this charge of championing human rights as the centerpiece of world order and not simply naked power.
The symbolism of this case is so important to point out, as you just did, particularly around South Africa being the one to present the charges. But even as you named earlier, the fact that this convention was initially designed, ratified in response to, or from, in reaction to what happened with the Holocaust, right? I think there's some symbolism that must be discussed. But I want to come back to what you just named around the US's role in all of this, because as we are watching in real time, the US is deepening its engagement, its investment in what's going on, right? The Biden administration, as you have named, has continued to send more weaponry by bypassing Congress to Israel as it's enacting this response. What kind of jurisdiction does the case have over U.S. officials or the U.S. government? What kind of complicity would the U.S. even have in this case, should it be heard?
Well, it currently doesn't, but that's a really interesting question, because South Africa has indicated that it is going to file additional charges at the ICJ against the U.S. and the U.K. for complicity in genocide under the convention. So, there are a variety of elements of the crime of genocide, and there are a variety of crimes. Incitement to genocide is a crime, and you can be complicit in crimes. And what the South African legal team is going to argue, joined by dozens of nations around the world, is that the U.S. is now complicit in this case. And there's a deep irony that I want to draw out here, just on the political level as well, because for observers of Israel-Palestine, they'll know that President Biden is no fan of Benjamin Netanyahu. On October 6th, I think if you spoke to anybody in the U.S. administration, many Israelis, they would say the greatest threat to Israeli democracy, to Israel in any form of Zionism whatsoever, isn't Palestinians, it's Benjamin Netanyahu. And so what President Biden did after October 7th, he didn't just express support for Israel, but he gave Benjamin Netanyahu a blank check. And on the very day yesterday that South Africa confirmed its intent to charge the United States with complicity in the crime of genocide in the Gaza Strip alongside Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a very public speech in which he completely rebuked the United States and President Biden. He said, there will be no two-state solution. He said, from the river to the sea will be Israeli sovereignty. He was very clear that he would, in the ICJ, the United States, no one would stop this goal. Netanyahu made clear what many observers of Netanyahu have known for many years, and that is that Netanyahu cares about one thing, that's Netanyahu. He also made clear something else that should all give us pause, that he is totally beholden to the Israeli right. There's a lot of extremism going around, from Hamas's atrocious attacks on October 7th to evangelical Christians, to some segments of evangelical Christians here praying basically for Armageddon and getting excited for the end of the world, to Israeli extremists in Israel's own government right now, who see this as the greatest opportunity, manna from heaven in a way, not just to get rid of Palestinians from Gaza, but from Jerusalem and the West Bank. And they're looking to escalate this conflict right now. And Netanyahu is in bed with these extremists. President Biden gave them a blank check, and now they're coming back around and saying, hey, doesn't matter, we're not even gonna we're not going to listen to a word you say. We just want your money. We want your support, and we know what we're going to do. And it has nothing to do with the interests of the United States or of a durable peace in the region.
It's really interesting also to see the way in which U.S. government officials have responded to Netanyahu's speech that he gave this week around saying, from the river to the sea, it will always be Israel. It'll be Israeli sovereignty, in giving him more or less what appeared to me to be the benefit of the doubt of he didn't really mean it. It's not official policy. He may change his mind in the future. Whereas what you're saying is that that's actually a really dangerous thing to say, or it's a really significant thing to say, given that it reflects the changes in the Israeli government, Israeli society, where these formerly extreme positions are becoming mainstream. And not only is it a slap in the face to American policy or stated interests in the region, but it also, as you have named before many times, this runs significant risk for our world because of the way in which Jerusalem and its holy sites and these factions within the Israeli government now want to basically appropriate these holy sites and change the status quo in ways that will create significant international issues and potential for violence.
Yeah, no, I mean, DCAT, like the stakes could not be higher. And I feel like we're just sound and fury screaming into the wind. Nobody's even paying attention to Jerusalem, where tensions have been ratcheting up. These extremists in power in Israel right now, it's not everybody Jewish, but they've got power right now. Some of them want to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem to rebuild the Jewish temple. Some tried many decades ago. You've got a minister in Israel's cabinet who has been indicted for terrorism in Israel, a Jewish minister, 9 times, and is allied with some of these movements. Just think for a moment what happens if that actually happens. The powder keg is not in the Red Sea with the Houthi pirates or Hezbollah in the north. These are things that can regionalize us. This is the powder keg. And every single day, no matter what you think about Israel, whatever you think about Palestinians, every single day this is allowed to go on. The risk of this exploding into something massive continues. Right now, we have this unholy convergence, a variety of geopolitical actors from Russia and China who see this as an opportunity to constrain American power. And President Biden stepped right into that trap and said, oh, yeah, okay, here we go. We're not going to, be an effective leader, in the world anymore. By the way, I'm a lifelong Democrat. So I just want to make sure, my criticism of Biden is understood as not a partisan one, but an actual criticism of a complete and total failure of leadership, both in an instrumental sense and a moral sense. So you got these geopolitical actors there. Then you got the local actors there. Like Hamas launched this. It knew exactly the response it was going to get, right? It wanted to shake things up, and it's doing that. And it called its attacks Al-Aqsa flood after Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? And so now you have these extremists on the ground that have these maximalist visions. It's us or them. There's nothing else. And the only way to make that happen is to have this blow up. They see this as opportunity. Israeli ministers are talking about another Nakba in Gaza. They've been talking about that from the very beginning, but many of them are also talking about it in the West Bank and preparing for that right now, and Jerusalem to have this maximalist vision. This moment could not be more dangerous. If you care about the future of Israel, the future of the Jewish people, the future of the Palestinian people, of humanity, of whomever, just human beings, this isn't about getting rid of Hamas. That's not what's happening in Gaza. And in fact, it's making Hamas stronger. If we want hostages home, if you want to restrict and restrain extremism like Hamas and some of these other ideologies that I've been referencing, we have to do everything within our power right now to make this stop. South Africa is trying to do that. South Africa should be praised as a potential savior of humanity in this moment. And while the ICJ itself may not be able to compel enforcement, what will happen is that there will be another number of other political, public, and also legal mechanisms that will be open up for civil society, for everyday people like you and me to take, should the court rule in South Africa's favor. That's going to say, because our governments and our leaders, Biden, Trump, everybody in America, is completely failing us and not putting the interests of our world, our nation, our people front and center, that now South Africa is providing an opportunity with countries around the world to say, no, we want a different kind of world, and we're going to fight for it, civil society from the bottom up. And so I don't know if we're going to be able to overcome this tsunami of these global forces and these extremist forces who see opportunity for a big fight right now. But I'm so grateful because I do think South Africa is giving us a fighting chance.
That's incredibly helpful, Greg. Context and also challenge, a call for us to know how to respond in this moment. What else can we do for those of us who are concerned, for those of us who care about the human rights of everyone in the region, who want this to end so that Israelis and Palestinians can move towards a future where everyone has equal measures of dignity, security, and freedom? What else can we be doing right now?
Well, I come back to the fundamentals. Remember, peacemaking is not about us feeling peaceful. Like, peacemaking is about like entering and showing up in very uncomfortable and difficult spaces. And so if we're serious about peacemaking, then what we have to do is we have to continue to show up. We're not going to have all the answers. We're never going to have the perfect words. But this is being done in our name as Americans. This is being done with our money, our political cover. It's being done for us, because of us. We're all paying for this. These are our weapons that are being dropped over there, right? So it's our job to speak up in whatever way we can. And if we have the ability to think like, how can I be heard, and we can speak to communities who aren't really paying attention and are really traumatized right now, which I get it. So many of my Jewish friends, my Israeli friends, are living through an absolutely horrific trauma. We are, I'm Palestinian American, for those who don't know, and most of my family lives over there. This is an absolute trauma. But my friends are living another trauma, and it's trauma upon trauma. We can extend that empathy to them, and if we can be heard in different ways, that's significant. But what I say, what I'll say is, I'll say three things, DCAT, because I love lists. And I'll make them up as I go along. I'm joking, maybe. But the first is to continue to show up. And showing up means showing up for the people in your lives, even if they disagree with you, to show up, to show them that you care, to listen. Deep listening, especially to people who are experiencing trauma, is transformational. But don't let that stop you from speaking up. I want all of us, and it includes me, it's hard to find the courage to speak up, to speak your truth. And your truth can be an uncertainty, but you can say, this is going to a terrible place. We need to stop. It means calling your members of Congress. For some of you, it may mean getting out into the streets. For some of you, it may mean that uncomfortable conversation where you tell personal stories at a dinner table and ask folks what can we do? The other thing is to continue to pay attention. Now, there's a caveat there. For us to be able to pay attention, we need to, take a step back. And I struggle with this right now. I have to tell you, every second I'm thinking about Gaza. I go into the supermarket and I'm waiting in line and I'm getting frustrated because and I'm like, wait a second, people I know in Gaza don't have food most days. And I'm getting frustrated over this little thing. And so I'm struggling with the reality of, living on comparative luxury and comfort, and still my everyday frustrations. And I don't know how to manage that. And yet what I'm saying, we need to give ourselves the the permission to take care of ourselves and communities and to nurture ourselves, but also that means continuing to show up. It can't be just about self-care. Like, peacemakers know that we have to dive into the unknown. We know that we have a responsibility. We know if we have the gift of voice, if we have the gift of health, if we have the gift of resource, we can leverage those things for a world in which everyone can flourish. And that's what we need at this particular moment. The world is standing at a particular juncture. This is a moment of inflection for the world. I'm no fan of American empire, as anyone who knows me knows. But the world is a place of hard power too. I'm really scared of a multipolar world with Russia and China right now, who aren't even talking about human rights. I'm furious with President Biden for taking the language of human rights and co-opting it and completely eviscerating it. But at the end of the day, human rights is the framework that will provide real security. At the end of the day, this is the only way forward that will give all of us our own autonomy and individuality to flourish as nation states, as individuals. So we have to keep coming back to human rights frame. And that's what's at stake right now. And all of us, with our voices, with our money, with our feet, with our bodies, we all have something to do. If you're not doing something right now, hey, got news for you. You're a co-author of all of the horror that we're seeing. And I don't say that to shame you, but I say it to remind us that we are all part of this reality that is uncertain, that the only constant is change, and that we're all part of the changing, whether we like it or not, for better and for worse. And so it doesn't mean, like, is it a question of whether one person changes the world? No, because we all do. That's what it means to be alive. And if you're listening to this podcast, you got a lot of power and opportunity. And I'm encouraging you, just use that in whatever way you can, whatever way you heard from us, whatever creative way you have. Get out there, do something. Like drops in the ocean. Together we can make waves.
Greg, what you said is so important. What I heard, amongst a number of things, that I will try to summarize and hit home here, is that none of us are safe until all of us are safe, and we can only be free when we're free together. That in our world, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, we can only have a good future when our neighbors are also enjoying that good future. And that's what it means to be peacemakers, to pursue that. So we do that in three ways. We show up and we listen. We speak up even when it's uncomfortable, and we pay attention both to ourselves and to those who are on the margins, who are suffering, who need us to amplify their voices. What a powerful set of commitments, folks. We implore you, we encourage you, and we ask you to do those things this week. And we're here for you, behind you, with you as you do them. See us as a resource. Reach out to us if you have questions, and know that we are with you in this work.
And reach out if you have suggestions, because look, none of us has all the answers right now. We know we got to do something. We're trying our best. We're showing up in the ways that we know how, but maybe there's ways we can come alongside you, or maybe there's ways we can use our voice in a more effective manner for you and your communities. Maybe there are ways we can partner. This is the time to do it. While this is a dangerous time, this is also a moment of extraordinary opportunity. It's a moment to show ourselves and the world that another way is possible. It's a moment to actually live out and embody our values. And it's a moment to say that those things that we say matter, the dignity of every human life, the fact that flourishing and agency is possible, maybe not in our lifetimes, but one day if we keep doing that work, just like the abolitionists did around the Declaration of Independence onward, building this framework that now we're not in a perfect place, but perhaps we've made a little bit of progress. Like, we can do that today. It's our challenge, DCAT, and I'm so grateful for you naming it as a challenge, but let's own it as an opportunity as well. This is our calling. This is our time. This is our moment. Let's do it together.
Let's do it, this peacemaking movement. I'm excited to hear from you all about the ways that you are getting active. Let us know, be in touch with us, reach out to us over social media, send us an email. You can find our contact information on our website. You can also respond to these podcasts with comments, suggestions, reviews. We'd love to hear from you, and feel free to share this, pass this along to those in your network that you believe need to hear this, would be encouraged to hear this. We're grateful for you. Stay tuned in. Show up, speak up, and pay attention. We're in this with you. Thanks for listening, folks.